Hi friends, today in this class let us discuss on Grimm's law and Verner's law. Before we come to Grimm's law per se, let us also talk about how Germanic family evolved from the Indo-European. Now about the various families of language in the world. Now, there was a conjecture, or rather a biblical mythology about the sons of Noah, Sem, Ham, and Japheth. And from Sem we have Semitic group, and from Ham we have Hamitic, and Japheth we have Japhetic group. Actually, the Afro-Asiatic family languages, would come under this Semitic and Hamitic group, and European and Indo-Iranian languages, or rather, the languages of the countries in the South Asian region. Almost all the European languages and the languages of the countries in the South Asian region would come under Japhetic group. And we believe, as language students, we believe, or we accept the existence or pre-existence of a language called Indo-European language as the parent language, from which evolved various families of languages, and we divide them into Western group and the Eastern group. And in the Western group we have Latin, Germanic or Teutonic, then Celtic and Hellenic. And in the eastern section, under Indo-European, we have Indo-Iranian, Sanskrit, Albanian, Armenian, and so on. So this Western group, we call it as a Kendam group, and the Eastern group, we call it as a Shadam group. Because in Indo-European, the word for 100, that is considered as the parameter or as the reference point. And the term for 100 in Indo-European was kumtom, from which, the Latin and other languages, they preserve all the features of Indo-European language. So in Latin and its categories, in the Western section, we have the word kendam. Whereas in the eastern side, the languages like a Sanskrit, there this velaric sound, consonant, that has been palatalized, and we have the sound sh and shadam group. So this is how the language students divide these two groups. When the other languages like Latin, Hellenic, and all, while they preserved most of the features of Indo-European, Germanic made a unique difference, and it developed its own way. And some important features, some unique features that we find with regard to Germanic languages must be noted. There are four principal features, that would make Germanic language unique and different from the other Indo-European languages. One is a simpler conjugation of verbs. Then we have a twofold classification of adjectives, that is strong and weak. Then there is a fixed stress accent in Germanic. And if, finally, we have a regular shifting of the stopped consonants. First, when we come to the inflection of its verbs, this is very much simplified very much simplified in Germanic. Whereas the other language, Indo-European languages like Latin, they preserved almost all the inflections and all the complicated forms as existed in Indo-European. Germanic simplified all these things, and they had only two forms of verbs, that is present and then past. In fact, they did not have a future tense, or terms for future tense. They used the present tense itself to indicate the future. There were forms, there were forms corresponding to sing and sang, but there was no form for will sing or shall sing or have sung. No, that is the future was indicated by the use of the present itself. And also, the various inflections to indicate a person, number, gender, voice, mood, etc. They have been, they have been dropped when you come to Germanic, or rather, they are limited in Germanic. When you take the other Indo-European languages like Latin, Hellenic, and all, they have preserved most of the inflectional endings that we find in Germanic, Indo-European language. The most distinctive feature is the way of developing a new way of forming past tense in Germanic. Apart from the strong verb that they preserved from Indo-European, they also devised a new method of forming weak verbs by adding the suffix ed. This came to be known as weak verbs. Indo-European method was to make a past tense, by a change, by a shifting of an internal vowel within the verb. This practice of forming verb was preserved in Germanic, and those verbs are called strong verbs. But in Germanic, the tendency was more of adding or creating more weak verbs by adding the suffix ed to the verbs. The second characteristic is the division of or a classification of adjectives as strong and weak form. Strong form of adjective means it can stand by its own without the presence of a determiner or a demonstrator. Whereas when there is a determiner or a demonstrator preceding the adjective, such an adjective is called a weak adjective. And then we come to the third characteristic, and that is the fixing of their accent. In Indo-European language, the accent was free. It can fall on any in any place, from the base syllable to the inflectional ending. Anywhere this can be placed. But when we come to Germanic, they started fixing the accent on the base syllable itself. And this is also one of the prominent reasons why in Germanic, there was a tendency of weakening and dropping off the inflectional suffixes or endings from the Indo-European parent language. Whereas, in Indo-European language, since the accent was not fixed, it moved from the base to the inflectional ending to show the different cases and, of nouns, etc. In Latin, we can find this presence of free accent. But primitive Germanic community, immediately after separation from the parent Indo-European family, fixed the accent on the base syllable. The stress accent has also been the reason for the weakening or the dropping of the inflectional endings, as I already mentioned. And as a result of this weakening of these inflectional endings, which used to express the grammatical relations in Indo-European, the Germanic people, they had to devise new ways of showing the grammatic relations by way of discovering a system of grammar like prepositions, conjunctions, tenses, and other things. The next characteristic is a regular shifting of the Indo-European stop consonants. And this is where we come to Grimm's law. Jacob Grimm is a famous linguist and a philologist. And he is the one who demonstrated, this particular discovery, conjecture as a theory with many examples from various Indo-European daughter languages. Uh, and what happened to Germanic while comparing it with the other daughter languages of Indo-European. So a comparison of similar words shows the effect of the change. The phenomenon was actually first discovered by another Danish linguist, Rasmus Rusk. But he had only a scanty number, only a few examples to show this particular or unique phenomenon in Germanic. Whereas Jacob Grimm came up with lot more examples from various languages to prove this particular feature that is called, the first consonant shift that is happening in Germanic language. It is called the first consonant shift because languages from High German, like Dutch and German, there were also other consonantal shifts or changes that took place in the course of time. That is why, in order to distinguish it from the other changes, Grimm called it as the first consonantal shift. He gathered more examples and showed all the plosive consonants or the stop consonants in what is happening to the stop consonants when they came to Germanic from the Indo-European parent. And he found that there is a regular and systematic change that is happening. The text also will be provided with aspirated voiced stops in Indo-European. they turned out to become unaspirated voiced stops in Germanic, and the voiced or unaspirated voiced stops in Indo-European would turn out to become voiceless stops in Germanic, and sequentially the voiceless stops in Indo-European will turn out to become voiceless fricatives or aspirates in Germanic. So these are the sequential steps through which Grimm explains the changes that took place, when Germanic was evolving from its parent Indo-European family. And he gives a lot of examples also to prove this theory. And in order to show this particular feature phenomenon, he also compares it and contrasts it with the other cousin languages, the sibling languages, that would come under this broader Indo-European family of languages like Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit in particular. Because he focuses more on Sanskrit because he found that even in Latin and in Hellenic Greek, there were also some changes, some kind of shifts happening, and as a result, some of the sounds had a slight mutation or some slight transition. For example, in Hellenic, the word frata, the sound bird turning out to become ph fur, as we find in Prata. So there were some slight changes. Whereas in Sanskrit, what he found was Sanskrit exactly xeroxed or duplicated, made a copy of its parent Indo-European, and almost all the features that we found in Indo-European could be traced in Sanskrit. So Sanskrit seemed to be more reliable than other languages of the family. Actually, these changes took place through hundreds of thousands of years. And there are also intermittent or intermediary steps periods. But we just skip all those intermediary periods and we would come directly to the final outcome of what really happened. As I said, this kind of sound changes took place in Greek and Latin. For example, PH in Greek, frata, and F in Latin, FRATER. So these are some of the slight changes that took place in Latin and Hellenic. So he relied more on Sanskrit because it preserved the original sounds, and so examples are taken mostly from Sanskrit. For example, "bur" sound in Sanskrit turned out to become "bur" in Old English and Modern English. We are talking about the Germanic because Old English and Anglo-Saxon, Old English, and Modern English evolved from this Germanic branch. That's why. So BH, "bur" sound became "bur" sound in Germanic. And he gives the example "brada" in Sanskrit. And the corresponding or equivalent in English is "brother." There is another Sanskrit word "bharami," and its equivalent in English is "bear." So in both you find the "pa" sound that is slightly modified or changed into "b" or voiced stop. Another one is "the." "The" we have examples in Sanskrit like "madhya," and yeah, the equivalent in English is "the middle." And you have yet another word "dwara." In English we have "door." There also "the" becoming "the." Then "rudhira," and we have the English equivalent as "red." "Madhu" in Sanskrit, and the English equivalent is mead, MEAD. So there are many examples that he could trace, or he could find. Another third one is "gh," GH sound. That became "g," that is a voice to stop, unaspirated. So Indo-European "gh" sound, GH, was simplified into either "g" or "h." In some branches, for example, in Sanskrit, it had to become "h." For example, in Sanskrit, it is "hamza." Whereas, in English, in modern English, the equivalent is "goose" or "geese." The second step that he found was Indo-European voiced stops "b," "d," "g." They became voiceless stops "p," "t," and "k" sound. In Germanic, the "b" sound was rarely used. Therefore, we have only a few examples with regard to this "b" sound. A few examples could be taken from some of the East European languages like Lithuanian and Slavonic. For example, in Lithuanian, we have a word dubus. So dubus. In English, it became deep, where we have b turning out to become per sound. There is another word troba. In Lithuanian, it meant house. And in English, we have thorp, thorpe. Thorp means village, rural area, etc. In Slavonic, old Slavonic, there is a word slabu, and the corresponding word in English is sleep. They are also b sound turning out to become p. Now the next one is the. How the turns out to become t sound. That we have examples in Latin. For example, cordis, and in English we have heart, where the cordis, the second one, the second syllable, this the turning out to become t sound. Pay this, and that became foot. Then we have edo, and we have the meaning is eat. Decham, in English we have 10. Dendam, and we have in English tooth. And also, the Sanskrit famous word Veda. Actually, it also has a corresponding equivalent in English. In English, it is wit. Veda means to know, knowledge. In English, wit also means knowledge, or to know wisdom, etc. Therefore, the old English Parliament was actually known as a Vitanag which means assembly of the wise men. Now we come to another section, that is turning out to become k. We have a word in Latin, genus, species and genus. You can also say genus or genus, and it becomes a kin in English. Ajar is another Latin word, and we have the equivalent acre in English. Janu is a Sanskrit word, and in English it turned out to become me. Actually, in old English, K and W, it was pronounced, K was pronounced, it was kini. Later on, that was dropped, and we have only ni now. Another word is gelidus in Latin, and it became cold in English. So, ger turning out to become k. Now, the third step, that is the Indo-European voiceless stops per, ter, k became voiceless aspirates in Germanic, like a fur, th, and a her. Per becoming fur. For example, pater in Latin, and Sanskrit we have pida, but in English we have father. So, per becoming fur. Piscis is another Latin word, and its English equivalent is fish. Now, how let's see how ter turning out to become th sound. Thrust is a Latin word. In English, it becomes three, thrw. Tu is another Latin word. In Hindi also, we have tu, and in English, we have thou, means you. Frater is another word, Latin word, and we have brother. Dentum, it becomes tooth. The turning out to become ter is, by way, incidentally that also comes. In the next section, we have the examples of a k turning out to become h sound, glottalic h sound. For example, kentum. Kentum is the term for 100, where k becomes a h in this. Whereas, there's an exception to Grimm's law in this section, because as per Grimm's law, actually kentum, the second syllable indum, that should have become ken, hundred, because ter should have become th, but it did not happen in this case. This will be explained later by Karl Verner in his Verner's law. There is another Latin word canis, which means hound, or hunting dog. Cordis is Latin word, and we have the corresponding one, heart, in English. So as I said, with the example of 100, we have some exceptions to Grimm's law. Grimm's law has certain exceptions, and they have definite reasons also for that. One cause is the influence of neighboring sounds. The voiceless stops did not change when they were preceded by spirans. Spirand means sa, za, etc. For example, in Latin, we have a word hostis, and the corresponding English is guest. How come her, turn, or reverting to g? The Grimm's law was just the other way. But here what happens is, her sound reverting to g. It should not happen according to Grimm's law. When two voiceless plosives come together, only the first changed, and the second one, it remained as it is. For example, we have a word octo in Latin, and in English we have eight, oc and to. So two consonant sounds are there. Change took place only in the first one, k, where it became gh, eigh. But whereas in the second one, it remained as it is, t. Octo became eight. Another is noctis. There also k and t. Change took place only in the first sound, and that is night, nigh. In the second one, it didn't happen. The second cause for the exceptions is the influence of stress, and it is where the Carl Werner would come with its explanation. And what is Werner's law? It's the continuation and completion of Grimm's law. In other words, Grimm explained only part of a series of sound changes in Germanic. The other part was complemented by Carl Werner. Indo-European voiceless plosive consonants per, t, k had become voiceless fricatives of th, h, provided the accent should be on the preceding syllable, on the preceding vowel. Once the accent is shifted to the preceding or the following syllable, there will be problem, there will be confusion. That is what Carl Werner discovered. Because once the accent is shifted to the preceding syllable or vowel, there is a tendency to revert or return back to the voiced stops bird. That is what happened in the word 100. Verner showed that this voicing was caused by the change in the place of stress. He said that in these cases, Grimm's law operated only when the stress was on the vowel preceding the consonant. When the stress was shifted to the next syllable, the voiceless fricative became the corresponding voiced stop. This difference is indicated in the different forms of certain Old English verbs, and he gives some examples. Old English verbs had four principal parts: infinitive, past singular, past plural, and past participle. I give you one example because we are not very much familiar with Old English terms. Therefore, I take only one example, and that is Veordan, Weorthan. The accent was on AO, Veordan. Whereas when it comes to the past singular also, the accent was preserved, Bayard. Whereas when it comes to past plural, the word is completely changed. It became Vurdon. Why this? Bayard, happened to become Vurdon because there was shift of or shift in the place of stress. The stress was shifted from the preceding syllable, preceding vowel to the following one. So as a result, th sound, th sound reverted to voice to stop the sound. That is Vurdon. And then later in past participle also it turned out to become Vorden. This is the word, Old English word Vorden means to become. I don't go for other examples because we are not familiar with those words. So in all these words, the infinitive and the past singular, they have the voiceless fricative, in fact, from Indo-European voiceless stop, because the stress was on the vowel preceding the consonant. In the past plural and the past participle, the stress was on the vowel following the consonant, so it became voiced into D. The same reason explains the presence of the in the word 100, whereas it should have been th, according to Grimm's law. The should have become the, but it didn't happen in 100. So this change might have happened before the Germanic stress shift. Thus, when later the stress was shifted to the base syllable, the cause for the voicing of these consonants became obscure, unknown. Nobody could trace it. So that vanished into oblivion. So Werner's law explains similar changes that happen to the spirand s sound also. The voiceless spirand s first became voiced z sound, and finally it became r or r sound when the stress was on the vowel following it. That is why we have the difference in the different forms of the same verb. Is and its plural is are. Was and its plural we have were. Most and more. The importance of Grimm's law and Werner's law, it's very much decisive in the history of the evolution of English language. Because they give us an important evidence about the family history of Indo-European languages. It shows that the Germanic languages form only one branch of a big family, and the division of the family was complete before these changes occurred. And also, they should be given credit for proving that all linguistic changes have definite causes, because they traced out all the regular and systematic changes that took place when Indo-European language, that got branched off into Germanic. In other words, these laws have laid the foundation for language as a science, or rather linguistic science. So we have the history of language sciences today, and Carl Werner and Jacob Grimm should be given the credit for it. So we wind up the session for the time being now. We shall come back with another topic in another class. Thank you very much.